We are on, and this is Dan and Yochanan with the Tzur Institute for Biblical Research, and we are here today to discuss Psalm 1.
Which is an amazing psalm. We've just been talking about it in Hebrew, and the Hebrew poetry in the Bible is beautifully powerful. And we're really just so amazed at that. And actually this psalm is talking to this directly in a way. It's talking about God's word. It's called here the law. It's in translations. We'll get to that. But the reason that we thought would be good to take this psalm, and what we're hoping to do is in another session to look at the psalm number 2, and then to see how they work together as an introduction to the book of Psalms, and how they both have their individual message, but actually there are literary and thematic connections between them, which actually point to them having a joint message.
So we have quite a plan ahead of us.
We do.
This episode today will deal and discuss Psalm 1 exclusively. And by exclusively, I don't mean that we're not going to head north, south, east, and west along the Bible canon. But we'll deal with Psalm 1 and not Psalm 2. The next episode we'll deal with Psalm 2, and then we hope to record a third episode dealing with the two of them together. And along the way, and especially by the third episode, we'll be expounding on how these two psalms connect to the rest of the Psalter, and how these two psalms connect perhaps back to Genesis, perhaps down to Revelation, how they connect to every person, and how they connect to the one person.
And that's a really important point, because as we look at today we're just going to look at Psalm 1, and the way that it speaks to every one of us. But we'll see when we get to Psalm 2 and the connections between them that actually this man that it's talking about actually could be a specific person as well. But the thing that has really spoken to my heart from this psalm in the last few weeks really is its emphasis on loving God's word. And that's really the aim of the Tzur Institute for Biblical Research, is to encourage people to read the Bible.
Especially Israeli people.
Especially Israeli
all
people. But all people also, because this, well, we'll see. Let's dive in.
Let's dive in. How about I read the psalm? I'm going to be reading the New King James, and then we'll talk about maybe more general aspect of how it's structured. How's that?
Good.
Blessed is the man who walks not in the counsel of the ungodly, nor stands in the path of sinners, nor sits in the seat of the scornful. But his delight is in the law of the Lord, and in his law he meditates day and night. He shall be like a tree planted by the rivers of water, that brings forth its fruit in its season, whose leaf also shall not wither, and whatever he does shall prosper. The ungodly are not so, but are like chaff which the wind drives away. Therefore the ungodly shall not stand in the judgment, nor sinners in the congregation of the righteous. For the Lord knows the way of the righteous, but the way of the ungodly shall perish. You know, just as preliminary observations, it's hard as one reads through even the English translation, it's hard not to notice that the psalm has some themes running through it from beginning to end, and how some of what you see in the beginning shows up at the end. And as you move to the middle, some of what you see on one side of the middle shows up on the other side of the middle. So if we talk about structure, would it be fair to say that this psalm could be divided in two? Maybe a first half and a second half?
Well, it looks like that very clearly, doesn't it? How would you say that works?
Well, the verses that were given, originally all this was written without verses, but it was nicely and neatly divided into 6 verses. And it seems like it's divided into the first 3 and the second 3.
Mm-hmm.
where the first three deal with the blessed man. All right, we'll leave it at that. This is universal, but let's leave it at blessed is the man. And verse 4 and on, the last three verses deal with the ungodly. The first half talks about what the blessed man doesn't do, what he does do, and then what he's like. And the second half deals with what in reverse order, what the ungodly are like, and what the ungodly will not do, and then what will happen to them.
And this is really a beautiful way of making a very stark comparison, isn't it?
Yes.
As you say, what the godly are like is juxtaposed, is put exactly next to what the ungodly are not like, or what they are like, but they're not like the godly, and even the picture is taken from the same of what they're like is taken from the same semantic field. You could say like this, they're both talking about some kind of growth, vegetation. One is the tree, and one is the chaff, which is the total opposite. That's the access exactly between them, this comparison, which is so stark, isn't it?
Yeah, the contrast becomes very strong as you get to, like you say, this axis. There's a middle point to the psalm, and you can feel that you cross the line once you're...
Right. But then there's also a connection between the end of the psalm and the beginning of the psalm in various ways, which maybe we'll talk about a little bit more.
Would you like to discuss this psalm this time around, maybe in these terms, beginning and end, and we move on, always from top and bottom, next part and the next part after that?
Well, if you look at the end, it's very interesting because you see firstly a comparison of the way. In verse 1 we're told, blessed is the man who does not walk in the counsel of the wicked, nor stand in the path. Well, in Hebrew, that path of sinners is derech. Derech. It means the way. It's the same word as is translated. I'm reading here the NUA, the New American.
The same is true for the New King James, but in either case, the word is synonymous, and in Hebrew, the word is identical.
Exactly.
Path and way are the same
So
word.
what the word that appears in verse 1, we could translate it, nor stands in the way of sinners, and then that comes back in verse 6. The Lord knows the way of the righteous, but the way of the wicked will perish. So it's very much talking that this connection from the end of the beginning is highlighting a central theme of this psalm, which is, what way do you walk?
And the contrast is also very stark. It doesn't give us a spectrum of ways, it gives us two ways.
Exactly.
There is the way of the righteous, there is the way of the wicked. And there is the counsel of the ungodly, and there is the way that God knows.
Right. And there's other connections here as well, between the end and the beginning. If you look at verse 5, where it says, therefore the wicked will not stand in judgment. Well, in the Hebrew, that could be translated stand, or you could say get up, especially in the light of the first verse,
yes.
Stand up, where in the first verse we get three verbs appearing one after the other, but in a very logical order. Walking, blessed is the man who doesn't walk in a certain way, nor stand in a certain path or way, nor sit. And that is a process where you can see happening which may represent a certain amount of depth of relationship to this. Like if he's walking, well, he can walk away, but then he stands.
Maybe we could talk about it in terms of progression.
Progression.
Or else regression.
Exactly. But the end of that process is sitting. And then in verse 5, the people who get to that, who are sitting, and we'll go back to talk about actually what verse 1 is saying, but just looking at the connection between the end and the beginning, the people who get to that, who are now sitting in the seat of scoffers, when then verse 5 comes along and says, the wicked will not stand, they will not arise, they will not
get up.
They will not get up.
Yes.
in the judgment. That's where they are, and that's where they will be.
We were discussing earlier this idea of sitting. In Hebrew, to sit also has to do with to settle.
Right.
Okay, so if you're settling down, building a house, or settling down with a bunch of other settlers and creating a community, this is where you will settle, and that becomes your place of residence.
And many times, like the expression in Hebrew, Yoshvei Haaretz, the people who, you could translate it directly, it's the same word, the sitters of the land.
Yes, these are the residents of the land.
They're the residents, that's their place.
So those are the sitters of the land. They will not budge unless...
Right.
So this is very interesting. We see that the blessed man, he is blessed because he does not regress in this manner. He doesn't walk in the counsel of the ungodly. He doesn't stand in the path of sinners. This is just regression from motion to standing still, or to even settling down with whom? With the scornful or the scoffers.
Right.
He doesn't settle down with them. If we think in contrary terms, which the psalm is going to provide in a way, but if we think of, if he doesn't walk in the counsel of the ungodly, then what counsel would he walk in?
Then that's really the important point, but maybe we can just think just a little bit about this progression of not walking in the counsel of the wicked. We are so much surrounded in society today by many different thoughts. And our society has drifted further and further away from the scriptural basis and what some people would say the Judeo-Christian basis of which was certainly true in the West, but we are now a long ways from that. And we're surrounded by different thoughts, of course, and different counsels. And what it's saying here is that, you know, you can walk in those counsels, but then how far do you let them in to you? And we can be so influenced by them that in the end, that becomes our whole worldview. And in the end, what is the end of this process? Sitting in the seat of scoffers, people who actually would defame God's name, who would pour scorn on what is the opposite, which is what we'll see in the next verse, which is walking according to God's word, law, and we'll get to that in a moment.
Yeah, it's worth noting. I suppose both our translations, they use, especially in the Psalms, even newer translations, they find it difficult to move too far away from the old King James because its translation of the Psalms was so poetic in English. But when we use the word counsel, it's not immediately or so readily clear to modern English speakers.
Right.
So if you think of a counselor giving you advice, that's a good beginning. But the advice that a good counselor would give, let's say a career counselor or a life counselor, would be, let's just get back to the Hebrew, all right? The word here for counsel stands for something more like a plan. A plan of action, a whole life plan, perhaps, of a way of living.
Maybe even a worldview.
A worldview, yeah, sure. The sphere in which you operate and the set of values according to which you make your choices. The counsel of the ungodly is that worldview, right. The ungodly worldview.
And it's interesting you should say that, because that very much also connects us to another connection with the end of the psalm, which you just don't see in the English at all. But in the Hebrew, in verse 5, where it says the assembly of the righteous, at the end of verse 5, actually it has the same consonants, the assembly, as the word counsel, except one, but that one consonant is one that can often be interchangeable. It's etzat or edat.
Yeah, that's a big stretch for English speakers, even if they do open up Hebrew lexicons.
But the interesting thing is that it brings out what you've said, that like this worldview. If you start walking in this worldview, then you become part of that assembly.
Yeah, sure.
And the psalmist has made that connection. by um, uh, uh, by making these play on words, which often happens in Hebrew poetry.
So by way of suggestion, we could suggest that it would say, who walks not with the assembly of the ungodly. We're not saying that this is what the psalm is saying, but there's at least a wordplay, consonantal connection between the two words.
Well, I think, the psalmist has very clearly wanted us to link that in our minds, the counsel of the wicked and the assembly of the righteous.
Which is made clear in other ways, just by saying ungodly, sinners, and scornful in such close
right.
One after the other. It gives us this image of this is that circle of people, those
right.
kinds of people, the ones who disdain God and his ways. And they invite you to walk with them. They call you to stand with them and discuss things. Have a seat, play, drink, eat, be merry, because tomorrow we die. And this is our worldview. But what is the opposite? The contrast that the psalmist does provide comes in verse 2. He contrasts all that. Blessed is the man who doesn't do those things, but what does he do? He delights in the law of the Lord, and in his law he meditates day and night. This bears some explanation. Delight is a nice word in English. It doesn't need too much explanation, except to say that what it's translating in Hebrew has to do with the things you want, the things you delight in. Earlier we were talking about hobbies or sports or the things that delight various people, and the things that delight various people are the things that those people talk about.
Right. Well, we talked about you and my wife who love riding bicycles, right?
Yeah.
Mountain bicycles.
And we end up talking a lot about bicycles. But this blessed man doesn't delight in bicycles. I mean, we don't know if he does, but what he certainly does delight in is God's law. But when we talk about law, many of our listeners will know, I'm sure, the law in English translates what we call in Hebrew the Torah. And the Torah, it's fair to say, is law. There is law in the Torah, but we will often say it is not a book of laws. It's a book that has laws. Genesis has barely one law, maybe thou shalt not eat of this fruit, lest you shall die. But the rest of the book is all narrative.
Actually, the word Torah is connected to the word teaching more, isn't it? It's like
instruction.
Instruction, and there are translations that translate it that way as well, actually.
So to make a long story short, instead of thinking of it's not the rules or the legal part that delights this blessed man. Rather, it's all of God's instruction, as opposed to
all of his counsel. You could
exactly.
say it's a comparison there, isn't it?
Yeah. God's counsel, his full counsel, delights this man.
And I think the other really important thing here is that this is not an outward compulsion. It's not, or something that I feel I just have to do because it's cultural or religious, or it's a really heartfelt delight. And in Hebrew, that really comes out. It's like something that you, from within you, want to do. It's a passion that you love doing.
It's not a duty. It's not something you tick off a list. It's what you actually want to do.
Mm-hmm.
And what else does he do? He meditates day and night. In that law, he meditates. So here, many commentators, and I've heard this in sermons too, I think they comment very well when they say, this is not an image of a yogi sitting cross-legged, meditating in a transcendent way about the words of the law. Rather, meditation in Hebrew has to do much more with speaking, making sounds, maybe even murmuring. So if you didn't have a copy of the Bible, copies of the Bibles, this only has to do with the printing press. We're talking about just a few centuries now. But before there were printed Bibles, there were scrolls and very, very, very large handwritten books, and they were rare. People would hear the Bible read to them, and if they delighted in it, they would try to commit it to memory, and they would speak it, discuss it, maybe even mumble the words to themselves. Preferably talk about it with somebody else, and they would sharpen one another as they went about it. This blessed person is doing just that. He's doing it day and night. That sounds awful familiar. He meditates on.
Well, that's interesting because this is another example of how, well, lots of literature and lots of poetry work, but also in Hebrew literature and poetry, this happens a lot, and there are allusions that refer to something else. You used a good example of what illusion is, didn't you, when we were talking about this in Hebrew?
In a much less technical term, the Bible is full of allusions. A less technical term would be reference, but it's not a reference in the way that you just write in the middle of the psalm, yes, this is referring to that chapter and that verse elsewhere. No. It's almost more like a meme. However, many of our listeners know what memes are. It's the reason to go back to Facebook every day. No, I'm just kidding. These are jokes that are based on a reference, a memorable reference from somewhere else.
That the hearers know.
Yes.
So that they get the joke or they get the reference, right?
Right. So whatever the story or the joke is, it assumes you will recognize what this is based off of. And
so what do we have here? What picture are we being referred to?
Well, if we're thinking of blessed men and those who are I can think of at least one who was commanded to meditate on the law day and night. In fact, it's the first time you encounter this verb meditate is right there. It's in Joshua chapter 1. Shall I turn there?
Yep.
In Joshua chapter 1, if I start from verse 7 and move on to verse 8 where this is alluding to, God is commanding Joshua, who was just receiving the reins to lead the people into Israel. He tells them, make sure that you are very strong and brave. Carefully obey all the law my servant Moses charged you to keep. Do not swerve from it to the right or to the left, so that you may be successful in all you do. In other words, so that you may prosper. This law scroll, or this book of the law, must not leave your lips. You must memorize it day and night. Well, I'm reading a very dynamic translation here.
I can read it here in the New American Version. Well, from verse 8, verse 7 of Joshua chapter 1, only be strong and very courageous, be careful to do according to all the law which Moses my servant commanded you. And again, law here, it's Torah, right? Mm-hmm. Which my servant Moses commanded you. Do not turn from it to the right or to the left, so that you will have success wherever you go. This book of the law shall not depart from your mouth, but you shall meditate on it day and night, so that you shall be careful to do according to all that is written in it. For then you will make your way prosperous, mm-hmm. and then you will have success. So there's several connections here that make clear that Psalm 1 is connecting into this. I mean, firstly, just meditating on it day and night.
Yeah, my translation took it a step ahead and wrote memorize it. Right? Okay. This is very good for understanding what meditate could actually lead to.
Yeah, but it does miss the connection with the Psalm. So it's very much clear that in the Hebrew, the word here, meditate, is found in Psalm 1, and that's the word that's mentioned here. Meditate on it. However you would then understand that word.
Right, and then you were already lighting up over the term prosper, mm-hmm. because this man whose delight is in God's instruction, who meditates on it day and night, he is like something. We finally get a description of what he's like. He shall be like a tree planted by the rivers of water, that brings forth its fruit in its season, whose leaf also shall not wither, and whatever he does shall prosper.
So that makes it very clear, because in Hebrew that's again the same word as appears in Joshua chapter 1.
And so God commanded Joshua to meditate on the law day and night and not swerve right or left. And if he does that, he will prosper in all his ways. And here the psalmist is describing a man who is already blessed because this is what he does.
Mm-hmm. But it's interesting, this allusion here, this back to Joshua, because you were saying, well, does this mean what? A kind of yogi who sits there and just meditates? Well, Joshua, obviously, he had been in the tent of meeting, the tabernacle, but he'd also already been a military leader. He had been the one who had taken Israel out to battle, had led them. He was very active. He'd been one of the spies, right, to go up to the land. And now he's being given the job of leading the people across the Jordan and leading them in battle again. And so this is something very relevant to not just to a special elite who can sit and study,
right,
but to everybody whose life might actually be full as well.
This is a great comment, Yochanan. I think it's not meditating on the law of God and God's instruction is not something for the academics or the scholars or the studious. It is something for all people who are looking for a practical way. Not for the sake of prosperity, as in, if you read the Bible and talk about it, then you will become wealthy and healthy and live a happy life. Rather, filling your mind and heart and thoughts with this will cause you to prosper in whatever ways you turn to. And this is worthy. Now, the imagery is very, it's very vivid. I do believe some of our listeners will have been to Israel. And those who haven't, it's worth describing just briefly. Israel is a semi-arid country. Our upper Galilee region gets rainfall like some of the, maybe not the drier parts of the U.S., but not a whole lot. And the further south you move in Israel, down to Beersheba, and then further south into the deep desert of the Negev, it just gets full desert. It's arid. All our trees throughout the whole country, even in the north where we have more rainfall, are rather small trees. If I give you the example of the local oaks, we have 3 different types of oaks. And all of them, to many American guests I've had on tours that I guided, they would always be surprised. That's an oak? They would say that looks more like a shrub or like a big bush. I'd often take offense at that. I have been fortunate to marry a Swiss lady, and she also makes the same comments about our local oak trees, except for a few certain places. There's a certain place up in the north called Tel Dan, and whoever's been there knows it's on one of the tributaries of the Jordan River, and it's flowing with water. Water is literally bursting out of the ground in many places. The trees that grow on those waters by all those little rivers they don't look like shrubs. Let me put it that way.
It's beautiful there.
Those are real big trees, impressive ones that it takes several men to hug. A tree like that, I mean, what does the imagery connote to you? I'm thinking of stability.
I think there's several really important things here. One is stability and one is fruitfulness. This plant, this tree is both large and stable and but also yields fruit, which can bless others. But another thing about it is that its roots, it has roots. It's planted by streams of water.
Who plants it? Who planted it? You know, it just occurred to me to ask. In the Hebrew, you get the passive, and you get the same in English. If it's a passive planting, who was it planted by? Is the psalmist alluding, or do you think, does he make room for us to wonder this question, or is it an illegitimate one?
It could well be. I think that there's definitely a relationship here. Someone planted this, but also the tree is drawing up its nourishment from a source.
Yeah. So if the tree is just a simile for the man who is blessed, and the man is a man who meditates on God's instruction, one might say that God's instruction is like those waters?
I think that's what the comparison is here. Yeah.
Maybe God is the one who plants this man. It's so interesting as we get into the middle of the psalm to see the parallel now is not so far away. The parallel is just the next verse. So if the first verse paralleled strongly with the last, and then the second verse a little more with the fifth, now we have the third verse paralleling with the fourth. We're at the middle, next to the axis.
And just before you get to that, I think this picture of the tree, where here's a man meditating on God's law, who delights in God's law. And you could say, and there's Psalms like Psalm 73, where even the psalmist himself in Psalm 73 says, look, I'm looking at the wicked and they're prospering and they're having a good life, and what about me? Until he came to the presence of God again, and then he saw their end. And the psalm brings us to that. But here you could say, well, so what if you're making God's word your source, the streams that you're... So what is that in practical terms going to give you? And this amazing connection between verse 2 and 3 says, well, it will mean that whatever you do, he prospers. I mean, whether it's work, whether it's your family life, and we see how much families are attacked and falling apart even as a concept, you know, and it means in every level of your life, it's saying here, whatever he does, he prospers when God's word, instruction, law is his delight and his source.
Yeah, this is very reminiscent of the blessing spoken in Deuteronomy 28. If you obey my law and hear my voice, then I will prosper you in all these different aspects of life. Mm-hmm. The wicked are not so, but are like chaff which the wind drives away. I think you pointed this out earlier.
Right.
I mean, and the imagery is we're still in the plant world, but the contrast is so stark. Chaff,
moving from this great tree which is bearing fruit to bless others,
planted by waters, it is moist and lush. You come to this piece of plant life that is absolutely dry and worthless. Chaff is that little itty bitty cover that grains have, whether it's a grain of wheat that the farmers thresh, right? This is an ancient practice. You have to go.
It's the part that's disregarded. It's the part that you want to get rid of.
You know, I enjoy roasting coffee every now and then, and part of the process is once you get the coffee out of, in my case, out of the oven or out of the roaster, you take it out, and I blow a fan on it to cool it down, but also to blow the chaff away. And I do it in the street away from my garden, because the chaff, it just gets in the way. It's I don't mean to say I'm littering the street. This is recorded, I realize, but it really does blow away and away and away, and I don't think it bothers anyone. It's worthless, and it's dry, and it blows in the wind, and its place, if I might add, remembers it no more. This is how the godly are. It's interesting you refer to Psalm 73, another psalm with the same numbers, 37. You know, God tells the psalmist, don't be angry, or don't try to compete with the wicked, even though they succeed and they prosper. And it seems so hard. You know, you drive down the highway, and the wicked, they might be driving nicer cars. And you get back to your home, and the wicked, they might have a nicer house, or maybe they own while you're renting. All sorts of, we can talk about all sorts of disparities in prosperity. But in all those Psalms, 73, 37, and also especially here at the very onset of the whole book of Psalms, the wicked might be doing all right now. Maybe they're sitting down and scoffing and having fun, but in the end, they're gone.
And again, this is not necessarily talking just about those people who have certain things. Maybe definitely that could be part of it, but and it's not also saying that this actually, he prospers, could mean financial prospering as well. It's talking about where the heart is, really, isn't it? It's like wherever this person is who's meditating, it's his heart. It may be that God is prospering him financially. It may be that he's prospering in other ways, in every way. But this comparison that you're pointing out here, the wicked are not so. They're like the chaff. They're blown away, and their end is very clearly pointed out in the next verse, where it says, the wicked will not stand. And again, we're seeing that verb there, to stand or to get up or to arise, which could be under the translations of the Hebrew word, as just carrying on from the end of verse 1. Those who are sitting in the seat of scoffers, well, now that's where they're going to stay. They're not going to be able to stand. And God has a time that he has appointed. This is what the psalm is saying. There is a judgment.
This psalm, we've already pointed out, displays just a stark contrast. There is black, there is white, there is wicked, there is godly. And as one reads it, it's, of course, it starts out with blessed is the man. And then blessed is the man who does this or who doesn't do that, but delights in this, and he will be like that. As you read the Hebrew, and I think also the same applies to the English, even though it's a bit older language, this could be read easily as a universal psalm. This speaks to anyone. And if women forgive the masculine, this speaks to men and women alike. And this psalm speaks to every person, and it can be applied to any person. At the same time, it can also be said that this psalm speaks of a certain person. What do you think about that?
I think that's a really important point. It's interesting also the allusion to Joshua and what that means. And I think we'll see maybe in our next conversation where there's connections in Psalm 2 to Psalm 1, which very definitely clarify that Psalm 2 is then shining a new light on Psalm 1, and it's telling us to understand it in a certain way in the light of the focal character in Psalm 2, who is the king, who is the son. But we'll see that maybe in our next conversation. I think here what we can take on this level also is this amazing fact that the book of Psalms opens with this word blessed. Blessed is he. And I think we can take this very clearly on the first level, just as, this is a challenge to all of us. This is, what not to do, not to walk down this road. But there is another way. The idea of way is a very important way, meaning how do you live? And to who and to what do you give your heart? Delight. It's talking about what your heart is. Because the paradoxical thing about it, we see in verse 6, it's actually that the Lord knows the way of the righteous, but the way of the wicked will perish. And here there's another stark comparison, isn't there?
Yeah. If we talk about literary components in the poetry, you get this very simple but reversed parallelism. So if in verse 6 you have the way of the righteous, and the parallel in reverse is the way of the wicked. The way of the wicked will perish. So the parallel to perishing, parallel in reverse, is God knows. Whatever God knows, it's not just something he knows in his mind or in his head or knows for a fact. This is more like, we spoke earlier of man knowing his wife, Adam and Eve, but that often sounds like a euphemism just for intercourse. It isn't. Biblical knowledge has a lot more to do with experience, and perhaps even more so with intimate knowledge.
And a deep relationship.
A deep relationship, that sort of knowledge. When a man knows his wife, it's not just he sleeps with her, he has an intimate relationship with her. Not just a connection of the bodies, but a connection of the whole person. And God, in this case, knows. He is intimately related to the way of the righteous. In contradistinction, the way of the wicked, that's just going to perish. It's not going to last. This was a great conversation, Yochanan. Yeah. I'm really looking forward to Psalm 2, and then, even perhaps more so, to see how those two fit together and how they fit in the whole Bible. There are so many more layers to peel off here. We didn't even touch on verse 3, the tree, and what connections it may have to the Garden of Eden. Well, we'll leave some for the next episodes.
Okay, good to talk.
Until next time.